Alrighty, in today's video, I'll be sharing my thoughts on Notion automations. Similar to my video about Notion Formulas 2.0 perspectives, some of my first videos on this channel were actually Notion automation videos, where my audio wasn't quite as great, and so most of those videos were just tutorials. I do have a playlist on my channel if you'd like to check that out, but in today's video I kind of want to explain my thoughts and perspectives on Notion automations similarly to the way that I did with Notion Formulas 2.0. And I've broken up my perspectives into three sections: current limitations, current opportunities, and my examples. And my examples are very brief, quick, and now the audio is a little better, so you can hopefully understand these a little easier. I think Notion Automations is really great, and I think it provides a really great sneak peek into what the possibilities are. I think, if I recall correctly, Notion bought a company called Automate.io, or another automation software, about a few years ago, and I feel like they're slowly kind of integrating the two softwares together, maybe on the backside. I don't know. But, I think although there are a lot of opportunities, I think it's worth going over some of the current limitations that we have. Again, this is October 8th of 2023. In the future, I could see a lot of this stuff changing, but it does seem like the basic features of Notion automations have been rolled out and such. I'm just going to read through my current limitations real quick. So you can't interact with formula properties. That is the next big thing. Most of my videos these days are about Notion Formulas 2.0, but the moment you're able to interact with certain outputs of Notion Formula 2.0, maybe it introduces another level of automation that adds so many more layers, right? With a formula, you can interact so many different properties in one place, and then imagine being able to use an automation to create a trigger based on that output. You can't use it as a trigger, and you can't use it as a output either, but I do imagine that that will change in the future. The other thing is most triggers are edited triggers, right? So if you go to the Thunderbolt, the lightning icon, and you click on it, and you click on new automation, again, if you are on the free plan, you don't have access to this, and so just a friendly reminder that you must have a plus plan to be able to use Notion automations. There's triggers and there's an output, or do this. Again, if you go to these triggers, you can only select certain properties, right? Notice there's no formula, and notice how most of them don't have that side arrow. And basically what that means is when you click on any one of these properties that doesn't have a side arrow, it just becomes a property is edited trigger. Although this might be helpful to create a certain trigger when some text is edited, it's not as versatile as one might think on the surface, as opposed to some of these other side arrows. And I've made videos on all three of these in the past in the Notion automations playlist. But basically what this allows is it allows you to create optionality within the triggers, right? So that it's not just edited, but when something is specified or changed to a certain status, these are defaults, so we can add whatever we want here. That's a very helpful trigger. Same with checkbox that I've done in the past. When it's checked, in previous videos it was only when it was edited, but now you can do checked, and then you can create these triggers. So the other thing is there's no templatized relational process like the database templates. In database templates, you can have the ability to self-reference certain things, and with Notion automations, you're not able to relationally link like you can in buttons, where you can select things like person who clicked on button, things that come pre-configured, but it works for any variable. So an example is, instead of specifying a person, for example, there's the ability to do me, which just says whosever Notion account this is, I want it to filter based on that person's tag. I'm Ray, and so it's basically filtering automatically on this, right? If I were to add someone else, add my other account, it automatically hides it because this filter is by me as opposed to myself, right? So this relational ability is non-existent for the most part. The few things you can do are relate a creation of an entry with the related entry that you're modifying. You can pre-fill a date based on today or now, but these are very minor ways in which you can pre-fill data using filters like this within a more templatized setting. Again, that sort of leads to the last point there, which is you must know the outcome or full process of what you want a trigger to fill. So what I mean is, say you know that when someone is marking as checkbox and you create a new follow-up entry in a separate database, we can immediately say, hey, let's date it today. and then let's number it 100. This is all theoretical, but now when I click on checkbox, we get this new entry. Yup, it enters today's date. The number fills 100. This works really well if you know all of the criteria that you want to autofill once a trigger is triggered. When I say that you must know the outcome or full process of what you want a trigger to fill, because we don't have those relational elements, you have to specify exact text or number or property every time you want to use a Notion automation. Again, the date property is that one exception that I illustrated, right, where it's that relational configuration that we see here and right there in the filters. It's a blue outlined background. But my point is, Notion automations are going to be really helpful if you know the exact text or exact specifications of when you do modify, edit, change one of these properties, you know you want it to do a certain thing. But when it comes to some of these other properties, like the ones without these arrows, because it's just based on edited trigger, it becomes more common to trigger things when you don't mean to. And so this edited feature has its limitations again, but the one thing I will say is if you work with a team, what can be immensely helpful is the ability to send Slack notifications. So if your team uses Slack, we can create a trigger when someone edits any property. And I think in the beginning, this Notion automations was actually focused on this feature of if someone edits anything, then send it to Slack. And in that sense, just the point of editing makes sense to trigger as any notification on Slack. But if you're not working on a team or with other people, the edited values have significantly less functional value unless you know you want to do something if you edit anything. That was a jumble of things, but you can imagine how when you're creating a new trigger and when you're only focused on editability, like when a URL is edited, right? If you have to change something, this trigger is still going to do the same steps that you set it up for because it's focused on being edited as opposed to being filled or deleted. So I think that's a really big drawback or limitation of Notion automations off the bat. Obviously, there's also opportunities, and I think Notion is going to focus more of its resources and time towards stuff like automations more. I think right now AI seems to be the leading focus of the Notion team, but I do think eventually by 2024 perhaps this video just won't make any more sense because of all the new features they've added since today. So I just want to reiterate on those Slack notifications, and then again those three properties have the caret or inequality sign available, right? The checkbox, multi-select, and status. And because these can all be categorically specified, there's so much more immediate trigger value than it just being an edited variation of it. I have 3 examples that illustrate those 3 variable triggers. I highly recommend that you explore using those in some way if you have a Notion Plus account and have the ability to configure some of these Notion automations. So I think the other opportunities that are unique to the outcome, the action, is the ability to add pages and edit pages once trigger criteria is met. So that basically gives you the power to sort of connect databases through a single view and through a single click. And I think that's pretty powerful. If I were to click on more, again, everything is preset, right? This is really cool relational configuration. Another one, right, that I mentioned, that blue background. And this is what I'm talking about, right? With the other properties, you're not able to do this like you are with a button, for example. This is another relational property. Sorry, I specify it. And let's just do checkbox checked. So now I create a new one, checkbox, because they both trigger on new database, relationally linked, date, and number. So these are pretty helpful immediate relational configurations that you can do with triggers. And creating new database entries is immensely helpful. And then another thing is similar to buttons, we can sort of create a filter and that matches certain criteria, similar to the filter menu and the grouped filter section. We can specify filters and say, hey, only update these pages. So if you have a certain way of sorting or organizing or manipulating your database entries, I think this edit pages in combined with specifying page properties through advanced filters can be really powerful. Obviously, if you don't have a very specific example in which this is useful, it might be hard to visualize, but I think you could create sort of a multi-select or status section where you say, hey, sort based on this. And then what you could do is select a certain status and then select a set of criteria, use and/or functions, and although this is just arbitrary, now you can update pages with this filter. And then once you figure out which pages you want to edit based on the filter, you can say, hey, I want to make sure the date gets updated to today or now. So I think that's really valuable, the ability to edit databases outside of the current one through a click. Again, there requires very specified constraints and filters, and so that goes back to our limitation of you must know the outcome or full process of what you want a trigger to fill. These go hand in hand. I think this is going to change over time. Again, I've said that. Another limitation, which could be thought out as an opportunity, is again the repeatable property filling. So if you have something that you regularly do or regularly fill, and it's the same thing over and over and over again, Notion automations is a perfect way to automate that function because you're just doing the same thing over and over and over again. And everything is pre-filled. You know exactly what the outcome is. You know what the full process of what you want to happen. And so that is exactly where you can start to think about using editing databases based on filters and then combining it with these three properties, checkboxes, multi-select, and statuses to get really specific and, create 5 or 6 different switches. So when you say, when any one of these statuses is clicked, now I have an automation that does this and pre-fills information for me. I think that's most of what I have to say for Notion automations. Hopefully everything I said makes sense. Oh, that's pretty cool. So I guess you can specify views within table settings now, which is pretty nice. Okay, so in some cases, if you already have a view that matches certain filter criteria, it seems like you can specify that, and it looks like it already takes into account the filters that are in the view. I'll have to explore that a little bit, but I think Notion is notorious for doing silent rollouts of features and also silent dead periods and server errors as well. So just want to be mindful about how stuff can be added overnight, and sometimes the only way you're actually going to find it is by exploring. There's been so many times where I'm just playing around and I'm like, wait, was that there yesterday? And most of the time it wasn't. Now I'm going to go over some of my examples that I have on previous videos on this channel back when I had a not so good mic. My first Notion automation use case, again, is combining the checkbox property with the creation of a new relationally connected entry to the source database entry that we're working with. Notice how when I click on project and task, I checkbox it and then a new project and a new task appear, right? And notice how in these table views of both of these projects and tasks, we have the new entry relationally linked and then also the project and task relationally linked as well. And now when we click on this new entry, we see both of these. Again, if we just do project, if we do task, it's basically doing the same thing, but now they're independent of each other. So new project under new client, new task under new client. But notice how project is empty and task is empty. In this case, I relationally connected the two project and task. In these, I just created independent project and task that is linked to the new entry. You can see that here. And then when you click on reset, basically resets all of that for you. I learned that more recently you don't need that reset button, because what you can actually do is when this is all clicked, you can just add a new edit property and you just uncheck it. And you just put it then there. So if I delete that, if I reset it, go to new client, new project and task, notice how it'll disappear now. It disappears. And so you don't actually need this reset button. It's because now you can just set it up so it disappears once you click on it, and it feels more like an automation. This is pretty neat, and I think in some ways you could create different dashboards in a singular view. And yeah, I think that's pretty valuable. So the next example is, I think, one of my more successful videos based on the content, and that is creating a new timesheet entry with this very simple view. I just have these 7 properties, and this is a great illustration of using the checkboxes and status properties because you can specify these automations exactly. I'm going to delete it. I'm going to create a new entry. You can click on clock in, and then when that happens, the timestamp of when I clocked in appears, and then my status goes to in progress. And now when I click on clock out, I'm going to wait 1 minute so that we can actually get some logged time in this view. Just trying to wait for a whole minute so we can get that clocked in time. There it goes. Okay, so now when I click on this, I've clocked out at 10:10 and I've clocked in for a total of 1 minute. And now it's marked as done. Pretty cool, pretty easy. Just those properties and these automations and this formula. And you can check that out in another video. Another one I made is creating a notification system using Notion automations. And again, this is using the create a database entry outside of the one you're already working in based on a trigger you specify. Last example here is where I use a status a multi-select and checkbox to illustrate a relational creation of a new notification that allows you to see an update in the sidebar as well. So I'm going to create a new entry. I'm going to name it new entry and see what happens. So when I go done, a new entry gets created, I'm tagged, and then a new entry is relationally connected here. Notice how that updates. Now if I do the same thing with complete, the same thing happens here, relationally connected. And again, these are just arbitrary statuses to illustrate what I'm trying to show. And notice how there's also a sidebar that says updates, and it tags you in what just happened, right? Complete and done. The last thing I'll show is this checkbox where if you click on it, we have the last one, share with client, relationally connects here. And now we have a third update, that's just share with client. So now we have share with client, complete and done. And because I've made it so it tags me, it pops up on the updates here. Right? I'm gonna mark as red. You can see the person there. And like another great example in which I'm using those three very specific customizable automations that we can trigger. These three arrows, these three inequality signs or carrots, sideway carrots, whatever you want to call them, are going to be your best bet when trying to create automations within a database, trying to create new database entries in a different database, editing pages, or even sending Slack notifications. Just want to point that out there. Again, these arrows, these carrots, sideway carrots, are going to be your best indicator that allows you to customize the most the current Notion automation system. Hopefully this was a valuable video. Kind of came out a little longer than I wanted it to, but don't want to discount what you can do currently with it, but don't want you to think you can do a bunch of things that you can't really do quite yet. But I think we're getting there, and thanks for watching the video all the way through if you came this far.